At this very moment, while you're watching this, the Earth is trembling in several different corners of the planet all at once. Venezuela was just hammered by twin earthquakes that hit within 39 seconds of one another. Japan registered a magnitude 7.4 event that set off a full tsunami warning. Scientists in California released a major study this month showing the San Andreas fault system carrying its highest stress load in 1,000 years. And the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and Nicaragua were all shaken within the same 7-day stretch. This isn't ordinary. News cycle noise. Something notable is unfolding across several fault systems at once. Today we're going to lay out exactly what's happening, where the danger is greatest, and whether this could escalate further. No speculation, no exaggeration, just the science, the facts, and what's actually at stake. Drop a comment below right now. Have you ever felt an earthquake yourself? A gentle tremor, a moderate jolt, or something strong enough to knock things off your shelves? Tell me where you were and what it was like. So many of you are from earthquake-prone regions, and I always enjoy reading those experiences. If you want to be among the first to know whenever something major happens geologically, hit subscribe. It costs nothing. A thumbs up helps a lot too. Let's push for 5,000 likes so the algorithm puts this in front of people who need to see it. Thanks. Now let's dig in. On June 24th, 2026, Venezuela was struck by what's now considered the most powerful earthquake sequence the nation has faced since 1900. I say sequence on purpose because this wasn't a single earthquake. It was too enormous. Seismic events separated by just 39 seconds. 39 seconds. That's hardly enough time to duck under a table. Never mind, get outside. The first quake registered magnitude 7.2. The second, the primary shock, came in at 7.5. Both were centered in the Yaracuy region of northwestern Venezuela, near the town of Yumare, west of the state capital San Felipe. USGS analysis identified both events as strike-slip earthquakes, meaning the ground on each side of the fault slid horizontally, past the other. Some geophysicists, working with alternate measurement models, argue the total energy released is better understood as one complex rupture nearing magnitude 7.8. Let me walk through why these figures add up to catastrophe, because plenty of people glance at a magnitude number and assume it's just an abstract statistic. First, depth. These quakes were alarmingly shallow. When a rupture occurs deep below the surface, say 100 kilometers down, much of the seismic energy is absorbed by the intervening rock before it reaches the surface, so the shaking felt above is comparatively mild. But when a rupture is shallow, and this one sat at roughly 10 kilometers, nearly all that energy slams into the surface undiminished. Everything sitting above the epicenter takes the full brunt with almost no geological buffer. Second, the buildings. Venezuela has endured a severe economic crisis for years. Infrastructure upkeep has been minimal, and construction standards in poorer, densely packed neighborhoods have gone largely unenforced. Enormous numbers of people live in unreinforced brick and concrete block homes never engineered to flex under seismic stress. When the ground is jolted violently twice within under a minute, those structures didn't bend. They came down. In La Guaira, the coastal region just north of Caracas, sitting almost directly above the rupture zone, reports suggest roughly 80% of buildings collapsed. Whole blocks were buried in rubble. Caracas itself endured a full minute of shaking, sending crowds fleeing into the streets in panic. The international airport sustained damage. Power went out across wide areas. Cell networks collapsed, cutting families off from each other and hampering rescue coordination. The USGS pager system, the agency's rapid response damage estimator for global earthquakes, immediately calculated a 44% likelihood that the eventual death toll would land between 10,000 and 100,000, and a 30% chance it would exceed 100,000. Sit with those numbers for a second. At the time this video was put together, the confirmed death toll stood above 3,800, with more than 16,700 injured reported. But nearly every expert following the situation warns that these confirmed figures are a severe undercount. Multiple missing persons databases place the number of unaccounted for people somewhere between 31,000 and over 50,000. The UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, stated that more than 50,000 people remain unaccounted for. A forensic pathologist working in La Guaira, who asked not to be named out of fear of government retaliation, told CNN that the official death count represents, in her words, not even a third of the true total. Her makeshift morgue was handling around 400 bodies a day. Refrigerated trucks were already full, and body bags were being left outside in the summer heat because there was no more indoor space. Decomposition was rapid, and identifying remains was becoming nearly impossible. Venezuela's government declared a national state of emergency, and international rescue crews began arriving. But there's a brutal compounding factor here. Venezuela was already in crisis before any of this happened. Roughly 8 million people already needed humanitarian aid before the earthquake struck. The healthcare system was already stretched to its limit, with many barely functioning hospitals, thin medical supply stockpiles, and a government that's been diplomatically isolated for years. NASA satellite imagery of the disaster zone suggested that far more than the roughly 700 buildings the government initially admitted were damaged or destroyed, the true figure is closer to 59,000 structures, including hospitals and schools, destroyed or severely compromised. The UN Development Program estimated economic damage between $4.7 and $8.7 billion. Other UN figures put total losses, factoring in infrastructure, at around $37 billion, roughly 6% of Venezuela's entire GDP gone in under a minute. The human stories emerging from the disaster zone are gutting. Families scattered across continents are posting photos of missing grandparents on social media, pleading for help finding survivors in specific collapsed buildings. One family, with relatives in Spain and in Orlando, Florida, was trying to locate grandparents who lived in a 7-story building in the town of Carabaleta. Rescue teams told them a crane would be needed just to shift the concrete slabs before any search could even begin. Without heavy equipment, they couldn't get near the site. That's what a magnitude 7.5 earthquake does to a city that wasn't built to withstand it. And that's exactly why every story in this video matters. The planet doesn't adjust its behavior based on a country's economic situation. Japan, a blueprint for survival. Around the same time the world was watching Venezuela's horror unfold, Japan experienced its own major seismic event. And the gap between the two outcomes teaches something essential about earthquake risk today. On April 20th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck off the Senriku coast of northeastern Japan along the Japan Trench. Japan's own meteorological agency initially clocked it at 7.7 before revising down to the final figure. Shaking was felt from Hokkaido in the north all the way to Aichi Prefecture in central Japan, meaning tens of millions of people experienced it directly. A CNN producer reporting from Tokyo described the building swaying for roughly 7 minutes straight. Immediately following the quake, Japanese authorities issued a 3-meter tsunami warning covering Iwate, Prefecture, and parts of Hokkaido and Aomori. Evacuation orders went out to around 44,000 residents in Hokkaido alone. Coastal residents moved inland to higher ground. An 80-centimeter wave was recorded at Kuji Port in Iwate. The warning was later downgraded to an advisory, then lifted entirely. Final toll, about 200 power outages, 2 injuries from falls, 0 deaths, 0 building collapses. Read that again. A magnitude 7.4, a tsunami warning. 7 minutes of shaking felt across a nation of 125 million, and 2 injuries, no fatalities. This contrast with Venezuela isn't about luck. The magnitudes were nearly identical, 7.4 versus 7.5. What differs entirely is what people built and how they prepared in the decades leading up to these earthquakes. Japan enforces some of the strictest seismic building codes anywhere, continually updated as research advances. Structures are engineered to flex and sway rather than crumble. The country has poured resources into base isolation technology, essentially massive shock absorbers embedded in building foundations. Rail systems automatically slow and halt the moment seismic sensors detect abnormal movement. Hospitals are designed to keep functioning through major quakes. And starting in elementary school, Japanese children drill earthquake response until it's instinctive. After the April quake, Japan issued a megaquake advisory. It's worth understanding what that actually means. It isn't a prediction. It's a formal government notice stating that the short-term likelihood of a magnitude 8 or higher event has temporarily climbed above baseline. In this instance, the weekly probability rose to about 1% versus a normal baseline of roughly 0.1%, 10 times higher than usual. Authorities urged residents across 182 towns and 7 prefectures to review their evacuation routes and confirm their nearest shelter. Not out of alarm, but as routine precaution the population takes seriously. The geology here matters a great deal. Japan sits where 4 tectonic plates converge: the Pacific, North American, Eurasian, and Philippine sea plates. It accounts for roughly 10% of global earthquake activity, and about 20% of the world's magnitude 6+ quakes happen in or near Japan. The country averages around 1,500 felt earthquakes annually. This isn't a nation that occasionally has earthquakes. It's a nation that lives permanently inside seismic activity. The April Senriku quake struck along the same stretch of the Japan Trench that produced the 2011 Tohoku disaster, a magnitude 9.1 event, the 4th strongest ever recorded. That 2011 tsunami killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Same coastline, same tectonic system. 15 years later, a smaller but still powerful 7.4 kills nobody. Japan has demonstrated something crucial to the rest of the world. Earthquake death tolls aren't dictated by geology alone. They're determined by choices governments and societies make years and decades before the ground ever moves. Now let's turn to California. Because what scientists just published about the San Andreas fault system in June 2026 is among the more alarming findings in recent earthquake science. A team led by Dr. Lilian Burkhardt of the University of Bern, Switzerland, published research in the Journal of Geophysical Research. Solid Earth, with a blunt conclusion, the San Andreas fault system in Southern California has now reached its highest stress level in the past 1,000 years. Here's what that means in practice. Two tectonic plates grind against each other, straining to move, but friction locks them in place near the surface and upper crust. Deeper down, the plates keep sliding, but the locked section can't release. So instead of dissipating through movement, the system stores that energy as elastic stress in the surrounding rock, essentially compressing and warping the crust. This continues for years, like decades, sometimes centuries. Eventually, once accumulated stress exceeds what the rock can withstand, the fault ruptures suddenly, and all that stored energy is released at once as an earthquake. The longer a fault segment stays locked, the more energy builds. And the larger the eventual earthquake tends to be. The southern San Andreas last had a major rupture in 1857, the Fort Tejon earthquake, estimated at magnitude 7.9. That was 169 years ago. For nearly 170 straight years, the Pacific and North American plates have been sliding past each other along this fault at roughly 5 centimeters per year without a major release. All that motion has to go somewhere, and it's gone into stress buildup in the rock. Dr. Burkhardt's team constructed a physics-based 4-dimensional computer model simulating 1,000 years of earthquake history along both the San Andreas and the neighboring San Jacinto fault. They fed it geological evidence, radiocarbon-dated sediment displacement, tree ring records of past ground ruptures, centuries of historical observation, then ran the model forward to today to estimate current stress levels. The result? Stress on multiple fault segments now sits at or above the highest level seen anywhere across the entire 1,000-year simulation. The system hasn't merely approached a critical threshold. According to the model, it's already exceeded it. But the study revealed a second finding that makes the picture even more complicated and potentially more dangerous. The San Andreas and San Jacinto systems intersect at a location called Cajon Pass, roughly 50 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. The researchers found this junction can function as an earthquake gate. Under the right conditions, a rupture traveling along the San Andreas could pass through Cajon Pass and jump onto the San Jacinto fault, turning what might have been a single fault event into a multi-fault rupture. Such a joint rupture crossing Cajon Pass, per the study, could produce a quake between magnitude 7.4 and 7.8, threatening not just one fault corridor, but the LA Basin, San Bernardino, Riverside County, and the Coachella Valley simultaneously. Right now, stress levels on both fault systems are running so close together and so elevated that the earthquake gate is effectively unlocked. Conditions for a joint rupture are in place. USGS geologist Kate Scharrer, a co-author on the study, put it plainly, because so much time has passed since either fault last ruptured, the accumulated stress is massive. USC seismologist Yehuda Ben-Zion, director of the statewide Southern California Earthquake Center, was asked when the next big one might strike, and answered, "It could be today, tomorrow, in 10 years, or in 30. On geological timescales, there's essentially no meaningful difference between those answers. The fallout from a magnitude 7.5 to 7.8 event striking this corridor would be severe. The LA metro area holds over 13 million people. Soil composition varies wildly across the region, and certain zones, particularly near river sediment and reclaimed land, amplify seismic waves significantly. Thousands of older soft-story apartment buildings from the 1960s and 70s are known to be highly vulnerable. Gas lines, water mains, and electrical grids all cross active fault traces. A simultaneous rupture of both systems would likely spark widespread fires from broken gas lines, cripple firefighting with water main failures, sever major freeways and rail corridors, and overwhelm hospitals at the exact moment they're needed most. Dr. Burkhardt's message to policymakers and emergency planners was unambiguous. Plan for a joint rupture of both fault systems as a realistic scenario, not a remote worst case. The time to act is now, not after the earthquake hits. Put it all together, Venezuela, Japan, California, plus a 6-point octave in the Philippines, a series of tremors rattling Papua New Guinea and a 5.2 in Nicaragua, and the natural human instinct is to search for a connection. Is something unusual happening right now? Is the planet more seismically active than normal? The honest scientific answer is no. The planet isn't more active than usual, though the full picture is a bit more nuanced than a flat no. Earth experiences thousands of earthquakes daily. Nearly all are far too small to feel without instruments. Those large enough to notice number in the hundreds globally each day. Quakes at magnitude 6 or above happen roughly 120 and 140 times a year, about once every 3 days somewhere on the planet. Seeing several significant quakes in 1 week is statistically expected, not unusual. The tectonic systems behind Venezuela's disaster and Japan's earthquake are geologically unconnected and separated by thousands of kilometers. Venezuela sits on the boundary between the South American and Caribbean plates, a transformed fault running roughly east-west across the continent's northern edge. Japan sits at a subduction zone where the Pacific plate dives beneath the Okhotsk microplate and surrounding plates. These systems don't interact in any meaningful seismological sense. Venezuela's earthquakes didn't trigger Japan's. There's no geological relationship between them. What the recent burst of activity does reflect is something simpler. The Pacific Ring of Fire, a roughly 40,000 kilometer arc of tectonic boundaries circling the Pacific Ocean, is, as always, intensely active. Japan, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, California, Mexico, Chile, and New Zealand all sit along or near this arc. The Ring of Fire accounts for around 90% of the world's earthquakes and roughly 75% of its active volcanoes. Monitor global seismic activity over any given week, and you'll almost always find multiple events along this belt because it never stops. What's changed isn't the geology, it's the number of people now living in its path, and how many of them occupy buildings and cities that can't withstand what that geology will inevitably unleash. That's the core issue. Global urban population has exploded over the last 70 years, and a huge share of that growth has clustered in cities sitting near active fault zones. Tokyo, Jakarta, Manila, Karachi, Los Angeles, Istanbul, Mexico City, Lima, Bogota, all major cities, all within reach of major seismic events. The question geologists and disaster risk specialists worry about most isn't whether these places will be hit. They will be. It's what condition the buildings, infrastructure, and emergency systems will be in when that happens. Let's be direct about the practical takeaway, because information without action is just anxiety. Venezuela's tragedy was made dramatically worse by conditions that built up over years before June 24th. Economic collapse meant building maintenance kept getting deferred. Poverty meant millions lived in structures that were never seismically sound to begin with. Political instability meant emergency systems went underfunded and underpracticed. The result? A 7.5 earthquake, already catastrophic on its own, became far worse than it had to be. Japan's story runs the opposite direction. Over generations, the country built a culture and infrastructure of seismic resilience. That doesn't happen quickly or cheaply. It demands sustained political commitment, investment, public education, and constant practice. But the 2026 outcome speaks for itself. A 7.4 earthquake that would have been a major disaster almost anywhere else became, in Japan, a manageable emergency with minimal injuries. Shake Alert, the earthquake early warning system, is now live and can give populated areas anywhere from seconds to tens of seconds of warning before shaking hits. Building codes for new construction are robust, but retrofitting older, vulnerable buildings has moved slowly. Funding for preparedness in lower-income communities is inconsistent, and the gap between what scientists understand about the risk and what the public grasps remains wide. Here's what you can personally control, wherever you live. You probably can't retrofit your building overnight, but you can put together 72 hours of emergency supplies, water, food, first aid, flashlights, medications. You can find out where your home's gas shutoff valve is. You can strap down your water heater and anchor heavy furniture to the wall. You can set up a family communication plan for when cell networks go down. You can know your neighborhood's evacuation routes. None of this takes more than an afternoon. In a major earthquake, it's the difference between getting through the emergency intact and not. If you're in Japan, you already live this reality. If you're in California, the risk is real and climbing. This month's research isn't background noise. If you're in Venezuela right now, the priority is safety and connecting with relief organizations on the ground. Final thought. The planet has been doing this for 4.5 billion years. Tectonic plates have shifted, faults have slipped, energy is released as earthquakes long before any human ever walked its surface, and it'll keep happening long after we're gone. We can't stop earthquakes. We don't have a reliable way to predict exactly when one will strike. What we can do, what Japan has shown the entire world is genuinely achievable, is choose how ready we are when it happens. An earthquake's death toll is a geological event paired with human decisions. Venezuela showed what happens when poverty, political instability, and weak infrastructure collide with a magnitude 7.5 quake. Japan showed what happens when a society takes geological reality seriously over decades and prepares accordingly. California remains the biggest open question. The latest science tells us Southern California's fault systems are under more stress than at any point in the last 1,000 years. The big one isn't a Hollywood concept anymore. It's a geological inevitability sitting closer to the present than at any time in the last millennium. What happens when it arrives will depend heavily on decisions being made right. Now, by city planners, engineers, politicians, and everyday residents. We'll keep following all of it, every aftershock in Venezuela, every new seismic reading along the San Andreas, every advisory out of Japan. Subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and drop that comment below. Have you ever been in an earthquake? Tell me where and what it felt like, because these aren't just geological events, they're human experiences, and remembering that is what keeps us taking this seriously. 5,000 likes on this one. Let's go. See you in the next video.